Let's talk to Jacob Rees Mogg, who can join us from North Somerset. Hello to you. Thank you for being with us. How would you sum up the evening, given the exit poll, given what looks like it could be a terrible night for the Conservatives?
Oh, well, you've said it. I mean, it's clearly a terrible night for the Conservatives. We're down supposedly to about 130 seats from having a majority of 80. There is no way of describing this as anything other than a bad night for the Conservative Party.
Where did it go wrong?
Where did it go wrong? I think that there were issues with changing the leader, that I think we do have an increasingly presidential system, and that people vote for a prime minister rather than for an individual member of parliament. I know the strict constitutional position, but that voters expect the prime minister they have chosen to remain the prime minister, and for it to be the voters who decide when that person is changed rather than it being done by a small cabal. And I'm afraid I think the Conservative Party took its core vote for granted, which is why you see so many people who may have voted Conservative previously going off to reform.
So the original sin was getting rid of Boris Johnson?
Well, original sin is a very interesting theological question, which I'd be happy to discuss on another occasion.
Maybe
so
not
I'm not
tonight,
quite sure I'd
Jacob.
put it that
Maybe not
strongly.
tonight.
Not tonight, no. On another occasion.
We do have 10 hours.
But yes, I think that people do vote for a leader, and that new leaders actually need an election pretty quickly. Gordon Brown made that mistake in not seeking his own mandate. The mandate is increasingly personal, and it looks as if this is a very strong mandate for Sir Keir Starmer. And actually, if that's the case, I wish him well in that, because we want good government for this country, whoever is in high office at any individual time.
The problem with criticising Rishi Sunak and a cabal, as you describe it, for having got rid of Boris Johnson is that you spent a lot of time with Steve Baker, who was in this studio not so long ago, plotting to get rid of Theresa May. And that she managed to stay in office just about, despite your best effort.
Boris Johnson then had Boris Johnson then had a very quick election after he'd become Prime Minister to get his own mandate. Bingo.
But in terms of that reality...
You need your own mandate. The mandate is personal.
But that's exactly why Rishi Sunak called it an election, isn't it? I mean, do you think it would have been impossible for him to win because of the kind of politician he was? I'm not entirely clear about whether or not you think he should have called an election sooner in order to have that personal mandate, or that if you had lost the country because you got rid of Boris Johnson, because he was followed by Liz Truss, who you backed.
I think the fundamental problem is that in this election we were taking our base for granted. And that is always a problem. And our base was peeling off to reform. And we have no divine right to votes. We need to win voters at every single election. And if you take your base for granted, if you don't manage to stop the boats coming over, if you don't manage to control migration, when that's what your voters are concerned about, your voters will look to other parties. So I think failing to deliver on conservative core principles did us a lot of harm.
Could there be a return of Boris Johnson in some regard, that if you think that removing him was the problem, might him coming back be part of the solution for the Tory party after this election?
You'll need to interview Boris and ask him what his plans are. I can't act as a spokesman for him. He's a very big and powerful figure, and as we see from Nigel Farage's success, as far as one can tell from the exit polls, big figures in politics make a difference, big charismatic figures. We are, in spite of the constitutional niceties, which I think are very important, and our system of individual MPs has strong residents, we are nonetheless an increasingly presidential system, and the charismatic individual leader is very important, and Nigel seems to have shown that in this election.
Should Nigel Farage find a place in the Conservative Party then, perhaps? There's been a discussion among some of your colleagues in the run-up to this. You might have avoided disaster if you'd welcomed him in earlier along.
Well, we are where we are, and the disaster doesn't seem to have been averted. Again, you'll have to ask Nigel what his plans are. I think he looks for and seeks a realignment of the right of British politics, and it'll be interesting to see whether he can achieve that.
Do you think that you are safe in your own seat just before we let you go, Jacob Rees Mogg?
I see what you've said about it on your programme earlier. I will wait and see that the votes are being counted or at least verified while we speak, and we will know in the early hours. So as the Earl of Oxford and Asquith used to say, wait and see.
You must have an inkling, though. I wonder just what's on your mind tonight. I think behind you there's perhaps a picture of Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher looking on. Maybe I'm incorrect, but I think just looking, spying that, is that who they are? And what do you think?
You're quite right. So there is, yes.
I recognise Mrs. Thatcher's hairdo there, even from this distance.
Excellent.
Well, Jacob Rees Mogg will let
you... But no, I have no inkling at this stage other than your exit poll.
OK. Well, Jacob Rees Mogg, thanks very much indeed for joining us. And, of course, we'll bring everybody watching the results from his count much later on in the evening.